yoga means to steer your life, to create your reality, to kind of control your reality. And the goal of yoga is actually quite simple. And sometimes this word, scares people a little bit, but is enlightenment. And enlightenment in Latin really just means to turn the light on. So when you turn the light on, it means you can start to see things that maybe you've missed your whole life. So with that in mind, it's nice to kind of have the essence of what we're actually going for, because yoga's kind of turned into sweaty fitness. And I think that's the key insight that kind of switches it. So once we have that goal in mind, it makes it a little easier to access it. And enlightenment for me is not something where we have to start levitating out of these beautiful chairs,
We already are.
I kind of feel elevated on these things. But it's more so really your highest expression, your full potential. And I think that's what we need to kind of go for. And our highest expression, our full potential, is not being controlled by our cravings and our aversions, like you said so beautifully.
To just actually become a conscious human being, and to reclaim that power is like to re-own all those parts we've unconsciously disowned within ourselves.
Yeah.
So let's start diving into like, what are the 8 limbs? What are these different? It is very much a science to be able to know who you are, to grow your awareness, and to ultimately become the master of your own destiny.
Yeah, the 8 limbs were, designed by Patanjali to self-realization and self-actualization. And the first limb, or one of the limbs, is asana, which is the physical practice. But it's so small. If you even read the Yoga Sutras, which is like one of the first texts of the yoga tradition to be transcribed by Patanjali, they only mention, I think, 2 physical postures in the whole book, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. And one of the postures is Padmasana, which is, seated posture. So when you look at these limbs, like, let's look at the first few. These are really important, the yamas and the niyamas, so the restraints and without restraints. So really these are like the moral conduct and ethics of the path. And he kind of says that if you keep these moral precepts, per se, kind of just like in Vipassana, they really do protect you and keep you on the path. And for me, it's been very much so the case. Some of them may seem very obvious, like, no killing or no stealing or no lying. But these things do protect you in all your relationships. They protect you in their life, and they really do keep you on the path. And they're kind of like the outer ring that connects all the traditions of yoga, from karma yoga to bhakti yoga. These are the wheels, I like to use the analogy, that kind of carry you to that center goal. You can't have enlightenment without having some kind of moral ethics. It's like the yogi's version of the 10 Commandments, And some of these, like if you look at all the incredible teachers, like a few that come to mind are like Mother Teresa and Gandhi and Jesus Christ, some of the greatest yogis that have ever walked this earth. They embody these qualities, these benevolent qualities. We can kind of dive into those. I think that the no killing one is an interesting one, because everyone hears that and they're like, well, I hope we're not talking to a serial killer. I don't think there's too many, at least in our community. But I think it's, you take everything a little bit under a magnifying glass and you start to look at, how much harm am I causing in my life? Whether it be, driving here in my gas car, or I think you're electric now. So the idea is kind of peeling back the layers and, even moving in towards your diet and, how am I cultivating that ahimsa, that peace within what I'm eating.
Yeah, it goes from the dense, gross understanding of don't kill another human being to, okay, what about all sentient life? What about the thoughts and the subtle thoughts that we have that are like tied with violence in some degree, and so being able to purify and get to those more and more subtle levels, because it's actually in the way that energetics, at least how I've come to understand it, is there's not a whole big difference from having an angry or violent thought and then the actual physical manifestation. Of course, it has its own implications in the real world. But in terms of your own karma, the impression is very similar.
Totally, yeah. Patanjali, he has in his Yoga Sutras, there's a lot of them. There's a specific sutra where he kind of outlines the goal of yoga. And it's really interesting. It's called Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And in English, it means to stop the movement of the mind, or yoga is to remove the fluctuations of the mind. And it kind of brings us back to what we were kind of talking about. The word asana actually means to sit still. which is kind of interesting because you hear it after every physical yoga posture. So he obviously wasn't talking about our physical bodies. He was talking about our minds to kind of remain still within these moving parts. And I think that's the big metaphor, is yoga becomes a metaphor for our life because we're really practicing removing the thoughts, getting still, and remaining equanimous through all these, these challenges, these ups and downs.
Yeah, most people have this idea, right, of yoga in the West, especially bending, twisting, turning, which of course is a part to be able to give expression to this animal body, but ultimately with the goal to be able to sit still and like deeply penetrate your mind and be able to find that stillness within. And like that's the actual ultimate goal. It's not just to get a good workout, which can be nice too. But
definitely no, and you know what? It's totally cool because I think that you can do yoga when you're doing anything. That just because you go in through something with the doorway marked physical doesn't mean that's what keeps you there. Anything can be yoga. I always like to say the easiest expression of yoga is just walking. I think if I could just give one piece of tidbit here of a health exercise, is just to walk. It's the most gentle form of exercise, and it can turn into a meditation, just being aware of your footsteps touching the earth, and kind of bringing back that focus and concentration. So yeah, I think that yoga is kind of, and it's cool. Like I personally, I love teaching yoga with hip hop music and making it fun and accessible. But ultimately, what it does is it just peels back those layers. Once you're put under a lot of heat and pressure, it's almost impossible not to have a spiritual experience, which is kind of, even if you're in like a CrossFit class, if you're observing your breath and you're in your body, that's the bridge.
Yeah.
That's the bridge towards from outside to inside.
Yeah. It's like a doorway into just presence.
Yeah, because it's hard to just, if you've had no experience with spirituality or no experience, moving into those unknown parts of yourself, sometimes going through the physical layer first is actually really helpful.